A top U.S. military official said the American warships that launched cruise missiles at Syria last week were sailing in waters experiencing levels of Russian naval activity not seen since the Cold War. The USS Ross and the USS Porter fired 59 Tomahawk missiles from the Mediterranean Sea. The body of water separates Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. According to Navy Admiral Michelle Howard, those waters, as well as other seas around Europe, have experienced a worrying spike in Russian naval activity in recent years. Howard told Reuters in an interview late Saturday, "We're seeing activity that we didn't even see when it was the Soviet Union."
Another day of protests in Caracas. Again, opposition supporters took to the streets on Monday to protest against the economic crisis and what they say is the dictatorship of leftist President Nicolás Maduro.
We've said it on many opportunities. This is a fight of resistance, and resistance means knowing who will break first. Our will is to continue protesting, or the will of those who repress in the name of dictatorship, to continue complying with their orders. We are not going to stop. We are going to carry on. Whilst the people accompany us in protest, we will be convoking them and mobilizing them. That is why today we return to the streets and our slogan is "No rest."
People in Venezuela have been irritated for months over shortages of basic goods and rampant inflation.
Unfortunately, we have gone out into the streets peacefully many times and we have had no response from the government. This time we've had enough. The people are tired and the people are committed to going out to the streets without fear of the onslaught by the National Guard, by the police, without fear of what is coming.
In the last few weeks, demonstrations have increased once again when the Venezuelan Supreme Court decided to assume the functions of the opposition-led Congress. Although the court quickly reversed its decision, street protests continued. On Friday, Venezuela's comptroller's office banned opposition leader Enrique Capriles from public office for 15 years. It said the ruling was due to administrative irregularities in his role as governor. Capriles is widely seen as the opposition's best hope in the presidential elections scheduled for next year. Most protests have degenerated into confrontations between youths throwing stones and security forces spraying crowds with tear gas. The government says the opposition is doing its best to overthrow the government.
I'm anxious to call for local elections so we show these people who we are. So they end with the roadblocks and violence, and we respond with votes.
On the streets, people think differently. They're demanding a date for local elections and seeking an early presidential vote. They say they won't stop protesting until the government gives in to their demands.
Authorities are reportedly kidnapping and torturing gay men. That's according to Russian newspaper Novaya Gazeta, which recorded testimonies from 3 gay men who said they were detained and tortured. Novaya Gazeta first reported on April 1st that over 100 gay men had gone missing after allegedly being rounded up by Chechen authorities. A spokesman for Chechnya's leader said the report was false, denying there are any gay people in Chechnya in the first place. Novaya Gazeta published a follow-up on April 4th, quoting 3 gay men who said they had been detained. They said prisoners were being beaten and electrocuted to reveal the names of other gay men. Human Rights Watch says it has received similar accounts from trusted sources of its own. The organization says based on the number of sources and the consistency of their stories, it has, quote, no doubt the allegations are true. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Mila Uni.
Chinese and Indian navies helped stop a ship hijacking by Somali pirates. Both countries helped rescue a merchant ship in the Arabian Sea Gulf of Aden. Agence France Presse said the carrier vessel OS-35 was travelling from Kelang, Malaysia to the port city of Aden when it was attacked by pirates on April 8th. The Indian Defence Ministry said 4 of its naval ships responded to a distress signal from the OS-35 Strong Room. The Chinese Defence Ministry noted a Chinese naval frigate also responded to the call. After recon was performed by an Indian naval helicopter, Chinese Special Naval Forces helped save the 19 Filipino crew members on board. As naval forces searched the vessel, it was confirmed the pirates fled overnight. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Rachel Latham.
According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, Fresh Express has recalled some of its prepackaged salad mix after a dead bat was discovered inside a bag sold in a Florida Walmart. A statement from the CDC claimed that 2 people found a dead bat in a bag of salad and that they had eaten some of the salad before discovering the animal. On Saturday, Walmart announced a recall of its 5-ounce organic market-side spring mix packages. The salads were sold in a clear container with production code G089B19 and best if used by date of April 14, 2017. The people who ate the salad were recommended to undergo rabies treatment. However, the CDC claimed that transmission of the disease by eating a rabid animal is extremely uncommon.
As Egypt's cabinet approved a 3-month state of emergency ahead of a scheduled trip by Pope Francis, families of victims of Sunday's bombing at Alexandria's Coptic Cathedral gathered at the monastery of St. Mina under heavy security on Monday. Ahead of the funeral, the coffins of the 17 killed were lined up on the tiled square outside the monastery. Police checked cars as they entered the grounds. Hundreds of people gathered outside and dozens of tanks lined parts of the road from Cairo. The blast in Egypt's second-largest city came hours after a bomb struck a Coptic church in Tanta, a nearby city in the Nile Delta. 27 were killed and nearly 80 wounded. Both attacks were claimed by the Islamic State. The group has waged a campaign against Egypt's Christian minority, the largest in the Middle East.
Pesticide linked to brain damage has environmental groups taking action. The United States Environmental Protection Agency announced March 29th it would not ban the use of the pesticide chlorpyrifos. Environmental groups sued in response. The pesticide is widely used in agriculture, but studies suggest it can cause damage to a child's developing brain. The EPA issued a report last November that concluded there were dietary and drinking water risks associated with the pesticide that could lead to developmental problems. Under former President Barack Obama, the EPA recommended banning the pesticide in response to these studies, but the agency under the current administration has reversed course and allowed it. The EPA's administrator recently said, quote, "By reversing the previous administration's steps, we are returning to using sound science in decision-making." Pesticide Action Network North America and the Natural Resources Defense Council asked a federal court April 5th to intervene and ban the EPA from allowing its use. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Gambrey Caldwell.
Newser.com has reported that a fugitive in Wisconsin has more than a dozen guns and a deep-seated hatred of religion and government. Federal authorities say that 32-year-old Joseph Jakubowski may be planning an act of mass violence against a church or religious group. Jakubowski is believed to have stolen at least 16 guns, including 2 or more assault rifles, in a break-in at the Armageddon Supplies gun shop in Janesville Tuesday night. His car was found on fire about 30 minutes after the theft. More than 150 federal, state, and local police officers are searching for Jakubowski in Wisconsin, and out-of-state leads are being followed up. Authorities say that before he disappeared, Jakubowski sent a 161-page manifesto to President Trump that was full of anti-religion sentiment and a laundry list of grievances against the government and upper class. Aerial surveys have found that 2/3 of Australia's Great Barrier Reef have been devastated by back-to-back years of severe coral bleaching. The devastation has raised fears that the natural wonder may not fully recover. Mass bleaching has been recorded on the Great Barrier Reef before, but researchers say 2 events have never occurred in such close proximity. Coral bleaching occurs when abnormal environmental conditions push corals to expel tiny photosynthetic algae, causing them to turn white. Heightened sea temperatures can play a role in the bleaching. The damage was recorded by the Australian Research Council's Centre of Excellence for Coral Reef Studies. The organization has carried out separate studies over the past 2 years.
Connecticut police say a man wearing a t-shirt that said "Hold my beer" and "Watch this" has been arrested for driving under the influence after he crashed into a graveyard. State police say 25-year-old Woodstock resident Harrison Wootton crashed his car into a graveyard's low stone wall in Putnam early on Monday. A mugshot shows Wootton wearing a black shirt with "Hold my beer" and "Watch this" printed on the front. Police say Wootton was charged with driving under the influence of alcohol or drugs, failing to drive in the proper lane, and misuse of plates.
Residents of Dallas, Texas are catching up on their sleep after being awakened by a terrifying alarm. Less than 20 minutes before midnight on Friday, April 7th, all 156 emergency weather sirens in Dallas began to wail loudly. It lasted for about 90 minutes before city engineers could manually shut down the system and give Dallasites a decent night's rest. You can imagine the thoughts going through Dallas residents' minds. It's late at night, no severe weather for miles, yet the sirens continued to shriek. The city initially chalked it up to a malfunction. The next day, a statement read, quote, "The city's siren system was hacked." The emergency sirens are now back up and running, and officials say safeguards have been put in place to prevent any future hacks. On Monday, City Manager T.C. Broadnax said Dallas is working with its police department, the FBI, and FCC to track down and prosecute whoever was behind the siren hack. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Matt Paul.
Parasite known as rat lungworm is wreaking havoc in Hawaii. The Maui News reports a recent spike in infections caused by the parasite. 6 cases have been reported on Maui in the past 3 months compared to just 2 in the last decade. Rat lungworm can move into a patient's nervous system and brain, causing a rare type of meningitis. It can even lead to death. There is no treatment. However, most people make a full recovery. Rat lungworm comes from an infection in rats. The rats expel worm larvae in their feces, which is then spread to larger animals, including snails and slugs. Health authorities in the state are advising people to wash their produce and avoid handling snails and slugs without gloves. Hawaii has seen an increase in invasive slug species recently, which some researchers say could be responsible for the rise in rat lungworm infections. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Mila Uni.
On Monday, a judge once more ruled that Republican lawmakers purposely designed a strict voter ID law to hinder minorities. In March, a separate court ruled that Republicans racially gerrymandered many congressional districts when drawing voting maps in 2011. While neither ruling has any immediate impact, the decisions are significant. The rulings raise the possibility of Texas losing the right to change its election laws without federal approval. This has been a goal of Democrats and minority rights groups since the U.S. Supreme Court struck down the requirement in 2013.
Philippine authorities called for calm but urged people to stay alert after 2 earthquakes hit Mabini, Batangas on Saturday, April 8th. A state of calamity was declared in Mabini after 5.7 and 5.9 magnitude quakes jolted the town a minute apart, according to ABS-CBN News. There were no reports of casualties, but many structures were damaged. PHIVOLCS Director Renato Solidum said an earthquake swarm started last week in the region. Seismologists have recorded more than 1,000 tremors. Solidum said this kind of activity isn't unusual and advised the public not to spread fears over social media about an expected larger earthquake, some refer to as the big one. Meanwhile, the Department of Social Welfare and Development said it had provided 1.4 million pesos worth of relief assistance to over 6,000 people as of Monday. President Rodrigo Duterte also vowed to accelerate relief and rehabilitation measures to the quake-affected towns. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Kimberly Caldwell.
North Korea has warned it would respond to reckless acts of aggression by the United States with whatever methods the U.S. wants to take. The announcement came after a U.S. aircraft carrier strike group is reportedly headed toward the Korean peninsula. China, who is North Korea's closest ally, has pressed America to engage in direct diplomatic negotiations with North Korea. U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said Beijing understands how dangerous North Korea's nuclear program has become and agrees action must be taken to stop it.
A new scientific study notes an increase in new flu viruses that might lead to future pandemics. Researchers from the University of New South Wales identified 7 new strains of influenza found in humans between 2011 and 2015. The study, published in the Archives of Public Health on March 27th, identified 19 influenza outbreaks since 1918, including 10 identified as animal-to-human infections. The escalation of new virus strains could increase the risk of virus mutating and spreading from person to person. Researchers noted several explanations for the escalation, including increased global poultry production and urbanization. As noted by study co-author Chowie Bui, the large number of viruses circulating among birds increased the likelihood of virus mutation. The study urged health authorities to plan for the likelihood of future pandemics. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Rachel Latham.
On Monday, an alliance of nonprofit groups sued the U.S. Department of Homeland Security to get logs of visitors to President Donald Trump's homes. The lawsuit says the Secret Service violated the law by ignoring many requests for visitors to the White House, Trump Tower in New York, and his Mar-a-Lago estate. The complaint was filed by the Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, the National Security Archive, the Knight First Amendment Institute at Columbia University, and archive researcher Kate Doyle.
Scientists recently discovered a unique group of giant viruses that are similar to cells. The 4 species are called Clossner viruses. Researchers have known about giant viruses since 2003, but these ones are different because they have a complex set of translation machinery. The findings were published in the journal Science on April 7th. A co-author of the study wrote, quote, "Since protein synthesis is one of the most prominent hallmarks of cellular life, it shows that these new viruses are more cell-like than any virus anyone has ever seen before." While scientists are interested in the viruses themselves, they are more curious about what they can tell us about virus evolution. Researchers found that the Clossner viruses were a mishmash of genetic information which had been picked up by host cells. This supports a theory that large viruses came from smaller ones instead of evolving from an ancient cell. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Milet Uni.
Swedish Prime Minister Stefan Löfven is frustrated with emerging details of a deadly extremist attack. According to authorities in Sweden, the driver of a truck that killed 4 people is a failed asylum seeker from Uzbekistan. Although authorities ordered the 39-year-old suspect to leave the country back in December, he went underground and evaded attempts to deport him. His residence permit had been rejected months earlier in 2016. The suspect of the attack has been detained on suspicion of terrorist offenses.
2 adults are dead at an elementary school in San Bernardino. According to the local police, one of the adults was a teacher. The situation has been described by authorities as a domestic dispute that ended in violence inside a classroom. 2 students were also injured during the shooting and have been transported to a local hospital. San Bernardino Police Chief Jared Burgon said that the incident appears to be a murder-suicide, adding that they believe the shooter is one of the deceased. A spokeswoman with the local school district stated reports of a shooting at North Park Elementary came in just before 10:30 in the morning.
The U.S. Navy has ordered the Carl Vinson Strike Group to the waters off the Korean Peninsula amid rising tensions with North Korea. Admiral Harry Harris, the commander of U.S. Pacific Command, directed the USS Carl Vinson Strike Group to sail north to the Western Pacific after departing Singapore on April 8th. Announcing carrier movements in advance is rare and generally done to send a clear message. The redirection of the strike group comes amid growing tensions after repeated missile tests by the North. Politicians across party lines in Seoul are reportedly alarmed by the new naval presence, including the country's presidential frontrunner Moon Jae-in, who told reporters on Saturday, quote, South Korea should be the owner of North Korean issues and take the lead in dealing with them, rather than letting countries such as the U.S. and China manage them. For Newsbeat Social from Washington, D.C., I'm Caitlin Mangum.
Venezuelan protesters faced off with security forces during government protests. Nearly 10 days of protest culminated on April 8th in the capital of Caracas as marchers battled with riot police. Police used tear gas and water cannons to prevent marches from continuing. Some of the protesters threw rocks and garbage at police, while nearly 100 protesters broke into an office of the Supreme Court. The protests first started over a March 29th Venezuelan Supreme Court ruling, giving all powers vested under the Venezuelan National Assembly to the court. The court ultimately reversed the decision. The Venezuelan government banned opposition leader Henrique Capriles on April 7th from running for office for the next 15 years, causing more unrest. Marchers blame President Nicolas Maduro for the protests. More than 40 people were detained during the rallies throughout the country. For Newsbeat Social, I'm Rachel Latham.
Foreign ministers from the G7 nations gathered in Italy on April 10th for talks dominated by Syria and Russia's support for Bashar al-Assad. The G7 summit follows a chemical attack last week that killed more than 80 people in the rebel-held town of Han Shayhun, and U.S. missile strikes ordered by President Donald Trump in retaliation. British Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson is reportedly pushing for sanctions against Russia if the country does not drop its backing for Assad. Russia, however, has rejected assertions that Assad used chemical arms against his own people and has said it will not cut its ties with the Syrian president. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson said Monday that the U.S. would hold accountable, quote, any and all who commit crimes against innocent people, although he did not say how far he planned to push Russian leadership. For Newsbeat Social from Washington, D.C., I'm Caitlin Mangum.